So before we get into, I guess, more broader Middle East conversation, I want to ask you, with all the stuff that's going on in Israel internally, you guys, you're probably, watching, and with all the stuff in the Supreme Court and all the stuff, they're trying to make a coalition, Bibi and Gantz and all these other people that are involved. Where do you see this going? That's like kind of the one component to my question. And also, do you think that Prime Minister Netanyahu, what do you think about him? What do you think that do you think he's been a good prime minister for Israel internally for the last 10 years that he's been here?
Well, first of all, Israel is within a whole, I would say, a change, a whole process of change, because people here in this country understood that for 25 years we are sliding in a very, very slippery slope into a state which is governed by the Supreme Court. And this is what happened since 1995, or even before, because in 1995, a professor named Aaron Barak became the president of the Supreme Court. And since then, he changed all the balances in this country in favor of the court. And now everything which the government and the Knesset, the Legislative Council, the authority which is directly elected by the people, for the people, is everybody, including the government and the Knesset, are under the open eye of the big brother, means the Supreme Court. Yeah. Instead of being a division of powers between the three authorities, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial became above the two others. And this is a process which most of the Israelis did not even realize what happened since 25 years. It was little by little, it was done in a very witty way, a very sneaky way, but now we all see, and today most of the Israelis understood the process in which people who were never elected, because those judges are chosen by a committee, they, as officials, actually control the country regardless of the Knesset and the government. Mm-hmm. And now this is what at stake, because the next Knesset, we the citizens, or at least the majority of the citizens, want to see a real change. Means that the Knesset, our representative, will start representing us and not the fears from the rulings of the Supreme Court, which actually paralyzes everything in this country, which the Supreme Court doesn't like. Mm-hmm. And we have to add a very important thing. The Supreme Court and its tentacles by which it controls the other authorities means the judicial advisors and the prosecution, they all the tentacles of this Supreme Court. And now we are in a point in history in which if we don't change it, we will sink all the way into it, and God help us. And this is actually what is at stake these days. All the other things, government, coalition, all the other things are secondary to this big question. However, unfortunately, there are too many Knesset members who think that the Supreme Court should run the country, and they are against any change. And this is why it is such a difficult job to be carried out, especially if we don't have a steady coalition. Add to this the problems which Netanyahu had, add to this the problems which Gantz had, and all the other things which are now accumulating on the big problem. So now we have to deal with a big conglomerate of problems chiefed by this problem of the Supreme Court and what to do with this.
I have a follow-up question to that. I was researching, I think it was in 2016 when I think Ayelet Shaked was already the justice minister, and they made a list of 28 people that they were, that they potentially think of as candidates for the Supreme Court, and then they dwindle it down to like, actually, I'm sorry, no, it was 28, but then from those 28, it was 12 people that were actually part of the Dati Leumi, what you would call, or the religious Zionist camp. And actually, one of those people, her last name is Wilner. She was like one of the original people in the Gush Emunim movement. She got picked for the Supreme Court. So do you think that there might be like a shift happening slowly, that like they even picked a person like that, one person out of 15 for the Supreme Court?
Definitely, there were attempts through the term of Shaked and others as well to put into the Supreme Court people who are more conservative rather than ultra-liberal or progressive as the others are. However, the president of the Supreme Court, she is one of the disciples of Aaron Barak. And she actually controls the whole thing. I'll give you a good example. There are like five conservative judges in the Supreme Court, thanks to Ayelet Shaked mainly. But day before yesterday and yesterday, the Supreme Court set to discuss whether Netanyahu can be a prime minister or not, although he was elected by those who voted for the Likud.
Yeah.
Now, whom did she take with her into the room with judges? Only progressive 11.
I noticed.
Means all the judges which were nominated or pushed into the Supreme Court by Ayelet Shaked are out of the game.
Yeah, I noticed that.
She manipulates the Supreme Court. She has more ways how to manipulate it. So as long as the president of the Supreme Court controls everything, the other judges, even those conservative ones which were nominated in the days of Ayelet Shaked, their influence on the rulings of this court is limited.
Well, it's interesting because even with that, the lawyer who was arguing against Bibi, I noticed they were very much pushing back against her. I noticed in the hearing, my Hebrew is not completely there, let's say, but I noticed that they told her, you're arguing on moral grounds, but none of your arguments stand on legal grounds. You're giving us like a moral argument why Bibi shouldn't be the prime minister, but we're telling you here's the law. And you have to have these laws passed before anything can happen. So it's like they kind of did push back on her.
And this is actually what happened, that the Supreme Court interprets the laws according to its own agenda, even if the law is totally against the ruling of the court, it doesn't make any difference, because they rule according to their views, ideals, and opinions, not according to the law. They are not bound by the law, and this is the problem. And this process already started 25 years ago in a very small issue, marginal between one company and one bank, and the company had the point, but the Supreme Court at that time, the president Aaron Barak, decided that the law is wrong, and he ruled against the law, and he issued a whole essay about his ability and the permission which he has as a judge to rule against the law. And this is actually how this court behaves until this very day. I'll give you a good example. The basic law of the Knesset forbids anyone who is against the fact that this country is Jewish and democratic, bans him from running to the Knesset. Means if you published articles, if you said in interviews that you oppose the being of the state of the Jewish people, and it should be democratic as well, you cannot run to the Knesset. There is a rule like this. But again and again, since 1996, there is a party, one of the Arab parties, which clearly, openly, explicitly calls to abolish the nature of the country as a Jewish and democratic state. And yet, every time and again, the Supreme Court allows this party to run to the Knesset against the law. And every time they invent different excuses for this. So, and the Supreme Court allowed itself to judge against the law. Not only this, as you know, there is, since last year, a basic law which is parallel to the Constitution, a basic law of the nation state. This state is a state of the Jewish people, and so forth. Some people appealed to the Supreme Court against this constitutional law, and the court did not kick them out. Yes, I think at some point this year, later, the court will actually discuss a basic law, which is in the status of a constitution. Excuse me? What, the Supreme Court is above the Constitution? Yes, according to what they think. Although there is no law in the Knesset, no law which enables and allows the Supreme Court to think or to even to judge against the law. But that's what they think, that they are allowed to do anything only because they are enlightened. This is how Aaron Barak phrased it. He rules according to the views of the enlightened men. And since then, since he said it, everybody knows who he thinks the enlightened man is, means himself.
Yeah.
And who are the darkened people? All the others, or at least all the others who do not agree with him. And this is actually what runs this country. A small sliver of the society which considers itself as Illuminati, means the enlightened, while all the others are in the darkness. They don't see the truth, they don't see the reality. Therefore, the Supreme Court allows itself to do whatever it likes according to the opinion of the enlightened people who sit there.
Don't you think it's because we don't in Israel, we don't really have an actual formal constitution, therefore we don't really have a real separation of powers. Let's say, for example, in America, so then there's no check on the Supreme Court. You can't, you know what I mean? I mean, they have limits, you know, that you have to retire at 70. Like in America, these people just keep going. Here in Israel, you have to retire at a certain age, and then the next person comes in.
Look, we do in Israel have some situation which does not occur in the States. For example, the Prime Minister should be a Knesset member. In the States, it cannot be because there is a clear separation between the legislative and the executive.
Tricameral.
Here in Israel, by law, the Prime Minister is, or should be, or cannot be otherwise than a Knesset member. Means there is some kind of a conjunction between the legislative council, the Knesset, and the government. So to say that Israel is totally with separation of authorities, as it is in the United States, it's not true. Because here we do have some connections between that. Okay, but what happened with the Supreme Court is definitely something which unheard of globally, and there is no democracy in the whole world which is run by a small group of oligarchy of people who think that they know everything while all the others know nothing.
So based on what you mentioned, the Arab parties, I want to segue away from this topic, and I want to ask you, and it's something, it's to do with the deal of the century, but it's something probably that I don't think anybody brings up, not that I heard of. I want you to talk about, if you do know the information, about the, I guess you can call it paternal relationship between the KGB and the PLO, and basically the founding of what today is the Palestinian movement and what eventually became the PA. If you know anything about that.
Well, there is much of writing about this, that the whole idea of establishing the PLO was an idea which came from the Soviets. Don't forget that we are actually talking about the late 50s and the early 60s. At those times, we had some separate organizations, Palestinian organizations, which were actually maintained terror against Israel. And just to make sure, Israel was before the occupation of the West Bank, as they call the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza. Israel was still very narrow borders, as were agreed upon in the ceasefire, and I emphasize ceasefire agreements or armistice agreements, which were signed in 1949 between Israel and Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. They never recognized Israel as a state. Therefore, these lines were never considered as borders. They are armistice lines. At that time, by the way, in the narrowest place between Netanya on the Mediterranean shore and Tulkarem, which was already occupied by Jordan, it is like 17 kilometers, like 10 miles. The airport of Dallas-Fort Worth cannot get into this place.
Yeah.
This waste of Israel is smaller than the space which the airport of Dallas-Fort Worth occupies. Okay, that small was Israel at that time, and so vulnerable. Now, at that time, there were many Arab or Palestinian organizations which maintained terror against Israel. It was the Fatah, it was the fronts, the Popular Front, the Democratic Front, the Arab Front, the Saika, Asifa, some like 12 organizations. But they were separate. They didn't have any umbrella above them or umbrella organization. This idea actually came from the KGB, because the KGB convinced some of these organizations to get together and to establish a political umbrella which will represent them vis-a-vis the whole world, and they, means the Soviets, will support this political umbrella. And this is actually the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was established in January 1st, 1964. And this is actually the PLO, and the idea came actually from the KGB. Don't forget, they did it because the KGB supported the organizations which were connected to the Soviet Union, especially the fronts, the Popular Front, and because they were like leftist, to say, organizations, like Che Guevara, if you remember him, or others.
Bader Meinhof gang, all those people that.
Yes. Meinhof was not so much connected to the Soviet Union, but Che Guevara was. So they apparently what they thought is that these fronts, which were connected to the KGB, will take over the PLO, means the political arena of the Palestinian organizations. And by then, the liberation of Palestine was actually to erase Israel altogether from the map, because it was before Israel occupied, as they say, the West Bank from Jordan and Gaza Strip from Egypt. So, yes, definitely there was a very influential support of the KGB to establish the PLO, and its activities were actually, in my view, designed, at least for a while, in Moscow.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that that still plays in? Because when I notice what happens on American college campuses, the way that propaganda is conducted by these let's say Students for Justice in Palestine, it seems to me, again, I'm a person who was born in the former Soviet Union. My parents told me these stories about how they were called, Israel's the aggressor, Jews are the aggressors. It literally seems to me that this is like KGB propaganda still used to this day by people who are like driving the Palestinian liberation movement, as it were. It's like incredible. I don't know if you it's something that you notice.
Look, these students are the same students who actually ran after Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Because for them, he is a socialist, maybe some kind of communist or Trotskyist. Yeah. So it's the same thing. It comes from the same place.
Yeah. No, I just think it's incredible that, like, I just brought this up to you now, and just no one in the pro-Israel sphere talks about it. It's just like this thing that kind of got buried, and I think it's really, as we say in in yeshivish, the ikar of the whole thing. People have, in order to understand where these people are coming from and their propaganda and all their agitprop, we have to understand its origins, and it's not just some nationalist movement, and it's just, I don't get it. Why do you think that is?
Look, this way how to recruit organizations for subversion against states was not restricted to here as well. Yeah. The demonstrations in France by Daniel the Redhead, or Daniel Bandit Cohen, actually it was another Jew, okay, in the 60s, were also encouraged by the Soviets because they wanted to undermine France, who was at that time the cornerstone of NATO after the United States of America. So in order to undermine NATO, they supported or directed these demonstrations in France against the government. Don't forget also that those days we had the war in Vietnam. And the war in Vietnam was actually the war of the United States of America representing the democracies against a regime which was directed by communism. Yeah. So on those days of the beginning of the 60s, the Cold War was at its peak, and the Soviets looked for every possibility and every opportunity to undermine Western states. And Israel definitely was viewed as a Western state because, first of all, we are not communist country. Yeah. Secondly, we were connected to Europe and later to America.
Yeah. So I want to move on to the next thing. It actually segues perfectly. So do you think that now everything that's happening, let's say, vis-a-vis, everything that Putin is doing with Syria, I know that Putin is not, obviously they've moved on from, so to speak, the traditional communism, and they moved on to something else, which I don't even know what name to give it, what they have in Russia. Thugocracy, I don't know. But it seems to me that he's still, continuing the whole thing of like trying to be or control certain things in the Middle East. He's very much involved with Syria, with Lebanon, with Hezbollah, with Iran. Is it just a thing where he just wants to keep power in the region? And you said you wanted to talk about oil prices. Is it just the oil thing, or is it something more than that? Is it something a continuation of the Soviet thing, and now it's just, today?
Well, just for the background, let me tell you something. I don't really believe that the so-called Soviets in the Soviet Union, they really believed in communism.
No.
I think communism for them was no more than slogans in order to maintain power,
correct,
in order to oppress everybody who doesn't work with them, and in order to recruit more and more states to their pact. The core of the beliefs of communism was never implemented. in the Soviet Union. On the contrary, the only place which real communism lived was in Israel, in the kibbutzim.
Yeah.
The kibbutzim were the only real implementation of, you know, shared property, no salaries, everybody works according to
your kids belong to the state.
Yeah, all these, the Soviet Union was only using the slogans of communism in order to maintain power and in order to coerce all the others based on these slogans of the Soviet Union, especially communism, fraternity of nations, which never in the Soviet Union, and so forth.
Yeah.
And what remained after the collapse of the Soviet Union, or Soviet Pact, actually, or Warsaw Pact, what the quest for power remained, because Russians, anyway, in their culture, in their view, in their worldview, tradition, way of thinking, mindset, call it as you like, Russians want to control others, whether it is Uzbeks, Kazakhs, Tataris, Ukrainians, whoever. Russians, and it's for centuries.
I have so many jokes that I want to say right now, but I'm not going to say them. Being a Russian speaker myself.
Okay, no, that's you can say whatever you like. It's okay. Yeah. We still believe in freedom of speech.
There's too many. There's too much stuff I can say right
now. Russia, for many years, the Tsars definitely were driven by the quest for power. It could be under the aegis of a Tsar. It could be under the aegis of a communist or a nationalist, as they are today. It doesn't really matter the slogans. What matters is the power, the quest for power, and their ability to maintain their power on others. And this is actually what there is. Putin himself, don't forget, he was an officer in the KGB. And the way which he treated, for example, the Chechens in 1996 was something which very, very vicious way. Very vicious. The capital of Chechnya, Grozny, was almost wiped off the map and off the ground as well. So many people were killed. So many people were murdered by the Russians, only because the Chechens wanted to rebel against the Russians. And I emphasize the word Russian. So this was after the communism. It was not with slogans of communism. It is because the quest of power and I would even say cruelty of the Russian leadership. So this is what we see now. Just look at how they treated for example, the city of Aleppo, how they actually flattened large parts of the city only because some hundreds of jihadists were hiding in these places. Who knows how many old people, women, children were buried alive under the rebels of Aleppo and other Syrian cities, only because the Russians do not want to go on the ground and fight from house to house, and Assad neither. Okay, so they flattened the city, and this is how they crashed the rebellion in Aleppo, for example. So since they couldn't care less about human life, and you cannot say anything against them in the United Nations because they have a veto in the Security Council. You cannot do anything. You cannot even condemn what they do. So this is what happened. But now they have a problem. Everything which Russia invested in Syria, in my view, was aiming at getting hold to the Syrian gas under
Are you getting a phone call by chance? It's like a noise.
No, it's not a phone call. It's apparently my WhatsApp. Let me close it.
It just keeps blinking and blinking. Yeah.
I closed it.
Sure.
I think it should not bother us anymore.
Okay.
Putin invested in Syria so much since like 4.5 years ago, not because he has good heart and not because he loves the Syrian. He did it because he wanted to get hold to the Syrian gas under the seabed of the Mediterranean. Just like Israel, Syria has large reservoir of gas under the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And Russia, as an energy supplier with gas and oil, does not want any competition from others. Okay, there are Saudis today, they cannot control them. There are the Qataris, the Iranians, and there is Israel, of course, with the gas. They cannot control others, but they can control the Syrians. And this is why they worked in Syria in order to put their hand on the oil and gas, which Syria has on the seabed of the Mediterranean. They did it because of the good heart, but because of this. However, this war on Syria becomes too expensive for Putin. His income from the oil is actually dropping for months already because of the competition on the oil production with Saudi Arabia, which brought prices to below the expenses of production. You know, today, oil producers, okay, it changed a few days ago, but for a long time, they sold oil for less than $25 per barrel.
Yeah.
And it means that they sell it for the price which is lower than their expenses to take out from the ground that barrel of oil. And Russia is doing this as well. Means their income from oil and gas of the Russians is now dropped down.
Yeah.
They cannot anymore finance the war on Syria.
Crazy.
So Putin wanted to put an end to the war in Syria, and he tried to convince Bashar Assad to come to terms with the opponents and with his opposition. Means the jihadists who are still holding to the city of Idlib and around it. However, Assad doesn't want it.
Yeah.
And so the Iranians as well. So from his point of view, Assad, he will continue the war until eternity or until he gets rid of those jihadists, whatever comes first. Although Putin doesn't support it anymore. So this is actually what pushed Putin to allow people to publicize articles against Bashar Assad. And this is actually what we saw during the last 3 weeks. How influential websites in Russia publicize harsh criticism against Bashar Assad. And this couldn't be done without the consent and I would say encouragement by Putin against Assad. This, in my humble view, is also some kind of a green card or green light, which Putin gave Israel to deal with the Iranian holding to Syria. And this is actually what we see during the last couple of days or last week, which almost every night, allegedly Israel, according to foreign media, attacks targets of the Iranians or their aides in Syria. In my humble view, and I don't have any information about this, this is something which, first of all, Russia, Putin, does not object, and I would even say encouraged by Putin, because Putin understood that the coalition between the Iranians and Bashar Assad is in order to continue the war against the jihadists until they get rid of them all.
Until the Mahdi comes.
While Putin wants already to put an end to this civil war. And this explains, first of all, the articles against Bashar Assad in the Syrian media. Secondly, the whether explicit or implicit green light which Putin gave Israel to deal with the Iranians in Syria. This is according to my humble view. I have no information about it.
You mentioned, by the way, Idlib. You probably have been watching what's going on with Turkey as it pertains to Idlib. Can you mention quickly, where does Turkey play into all of this? Like, what's their whole deal?
Well, Turkey tries to occupy a whole strip along the Turkish-Syrian border inside Syria, a strip which will be like 600 or 700 kilometers long and 30 kilometers wide into the Syrian space, in order to create a safe haven for the 3.5 million Syrian refugees who are in Turkey, and they are a very heavy burden to the Turkish economy. As you know, the Turkish economy today suffers heavily. The coronavirus as well is part of this problem, because the tourism which Turkey was living on actually is nullified. And Turkey wanted to occupy this part of Syria in order to move the refugees. Of course, this is against the will of Bashar and against the will of the Iranians. And Putin supports it. He supports it because he wants Turkey stable. He doesn't want the Erdogan to collapse, because Putin is afraid that if Turkey collapses or Erdogan collapses, Turkey might slide into a chaos between the Kurds and the Turks, between Islamists and modernists, between all kinds and all kinds. And he is afraid, Putin, that if Turkey becomes a chaos, he will not be able, Putin will not be able to send his navy to the Bosphorus Straits, because it will be too dangerous. Because if people start shooting each other, you don't want to be there, and you don't want your vessels to be under the missiles, which one side will shoot at the others. And this is what made, and if the Russian Navy is trapped inside the Black Sea or in the Mediterranean without an ability to go from one to the other through the Bosphorus Straits, because of this civil war which might erupt in Turkey, Putin is in a problem. He will not be able to use at least part of his navy. So for this, he needs a stable Turkey with a stable economy. This is why he is much more responsive to Erdogan's problems than many others in the whole world.
So basically what you just described, it seems like there's like a kind of a realignment happening, and it's all, I guess, the fulcrum of it is Putin. And I guess when you look at something like Saudi Arabia, we see how, Saudi Arabia and also Bahrain and also I think Oman, they're kind of cozying up to Israel as of late, maybe the past couple of years. And I just want to mention for the viewers, like, there are sources in our tradition that talk about, in Acharit Hayamim and end of days, that Ishmael, so to speak, will do tshuva, he will repent, and he will come close to his brother Yitzhak. So do you think that this is actually something that's part of that? Or do you think it's just Saudi Arabia is getting close to us because, their sworn enemy is Iran and their sworn enemy are the Shiites, and we are just kind of like, what is it, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, so to speak? Or is it something deeper? Is it something to put more stock into from a Torah perspective?
Well, although I'm an observant Jew, I didn't get any message from the Almighty that the end of days have already came. So to interpret what happens according to the theories about the end of time, I'm not that brave on one side, and I'm not that knowledge. I don't have so deep knowledge about the end of time. I wasn't there yet. When I come back from there, I'll let you know. However, However, those Gulf countries which are causing up to Israel, as you described, it's not because they started to love Israel or because they want to have good relations with Israel. It is caused by their fear from Iran. And they are afraid that Iran, after it took over Iraq, Syria, parts of Yemen, they will be the next. And don't forget that in the Gulf states, especially in the Emirates, Qatar as well, Kuwait as well, and Saudi Arabia, of course, they all have a Shia minority. Each and every one of them has a Shia minority. And they are afraid that this Shia, which in many cases they speak Persian, they will be influenced by the Iranian regime and try to undermine the stability of these countries. Means the Iranian enemy actually has a presence inside those countries. And they are shaking and shivering because of the ability of those Shi'i minorities to undermine the stability of these states. Of course, they don't let them. They try to fight them. They try to struggle against them, but they are afraid. Iran threatens the hegemony of the West, which they are hiding behind. In the Gulf, of course, now they have some problems with Trump, who has all kinds of ideas about the low prices of oil, which he doesn't like because it affects also the American economy. He has some concerns about defending Saudi Arabia without getting paid by Saudi Arabia. Okay, these things definitely are there, but in my view, they are in the margin. The main interests of United States and the Gulf countries are more or less the same. So, especially vis-a-vis Iran. So, at the end of the day, what we see today is approaching to the States and to Israel because of their fear from the Iranians. Of course, for this, they have to turn their back to the Palestinians, who would never like to see any peace or any progress in the relations between Israel and its neighbors, unless the Palestinian problem is solved according to what the Palestinians desire. And they desire definitely to get rid of Israel altogether. So there's some kind of, as long as Israel is on the ground, the Palestinians would not like anything positive which happens with Israel, especially in Arab countries. Now, many Arabs, especially in Saudi Arabia, understood this, in Bahrain as well, in the Emirates as well. They understood this mindset of the Palestinians, and they now we can see that many of them on the social media, and saying to the Palestinians, "Hey guys, we are not we are not behind you anymore, because of various reasons. There is no Palestinian people. The land of Israel belongs to the Jews. All kinds of things which very rarely we heard in the past in the Arab world. Now we hear them much more frequently, and by people who do not hide behind the anonymity. They say to the camera in Arabic. And yes, today you are allowed to say in Saudi Arabia and other countries that you support Israel, and your head remains connected to your shoulders.
Do you think that that's going to cascade into the rest of the Arab world? This mentality of finally people are, I saw the video of this Saudi sheikh. It was published in Israeli news. He said, you Palestinians are equals, you guys are this, you guys are that. Do you think it's going to...
His name is Rawaf al-Sa'in. He is a writer in Saudi Arabia. Look, don't forget that we already have peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan. So it's not the beginning of the source of the course of peace between Israel and its neighbors. Look, and Egypt is the biggest, and for a long while it was the most influential Arab country. Recently they passed the 100 million people in Egypt. So it's not a small country. Of course, its political power is connected to their economic problems, but definitely we have peace agreement with the government of Egypt. And here I should emphasize the government, because many in the streets of Egypt do not like this peace with Israel.
Correct.
And if they could, they would cancel it yesterday. Jordan as well. We have a peace with the king and his ruling family. Yet many in the population of Jordan, they do not want this peace. They don't recognize this peace as a legitimate peace. And yes, not always the regime does what the people want. After all, these countries are not democracies. And the governor of the country is not really freely elected.
So we were speaking about the Gulf states. One Gulf state, and I actually read it, I think, a couple of days ago. Qatar, supposedly there's some kind of a coup that they're trying to do, a military coup against the government. Like, how does that play into the, what Qatar is doing with Hamas and how they're influencing Hamas, and also in general, what do you think? What do you think the future for Hamas is? Because I hear that they're basically about to fall apart because of this coronavirus thing, and they're just literally like, we're just giving them food right now, but everything else they're just like dwindling away, and maybe by the end of it they'll be gone.
Well, first of all, don't forget that Hamas, since there is a siege on Gaza by Israel on one side and Egypt on the other side, the coronavirus did not go to Gaza for a very long while, and I think until March. Only in March, 2 people came back from Pakistan. Guess what they did there? And they came with a corona. However, they were immediately, upon entering Gaza, they were quarantined. In quarantine of the Gazans of Hamas, which was right next to the crossing of Rafah. So they didn't bring the coronavirus to Gaza. There are, I think, some dozens of cases in Gaza because Hamas took it very seriously. And don't forget that when they started having the first cases, the whole world was already contaminated with the coronavirus. So they already have heard about this, and they were actually prepared way much better than many, many other countries who prepared themselves, while facing it. They were prepared before they had to face it, and they knew everything, and they knew everything which others know about this virus. They knew before the first case came to Gaza. So thanks to this, they were in their preparations. The coronavirus that didn't attack Gaza in a significant way. However, Hamas are very much afraid from the economic situation because Iran is in a collapse because of the corona now, and formerly because of the American sanctions. China bought much less energy from Iran during the last few months because of the shutdown of the Chinese industry. And it affected also Iran. And when Iran doesn't have money, they don't send money to other entities like Hamas. So Hamas were, with good reason, very much afraid that their main source of income will actually evaporate. So they are definitely under pressure. This is why now they want to come with Israel all kinds of terms about releasing the people who are still alive and the 2 soldiers who actually are dead.
With all this, what do you think the future of Iran is? Do you think, can this thing that's happening now, this pandemic, just take down the regime just organically? And, Iranians are not, it's not an Arab country. These are totally different people. You have a whole youth population that's very, very skilled and talented. A lot of people are, openly they're Muslim, but they're really secular people. Some people follow still the Zoroastrian faith and stuff like that. Do you think there's a future for them in terms of like having actual some semblance of democratic government should this thing collapse?
Look, I'm not a prophet, but it is not likely to happen in this foreseeable future, because democracy needs not a regime of democratic regime. It needs a culture change of the whole people, all the people. Means they have to download, if the expression is okay, to download the new culture and to install it into their minds. You can do it with one person. You can do it with a little family. If you send them to other place, they can change within time. It is very, very hard to do it on a scale of a whole society, a whole state, when this state is like 80 million people. So it's not easy at all to change their culture. And what can I do? Democracy is not matter of only a regime. It's a culture of the people, that they believe in freedom of women, they believe in freedom of speech, they believe in freedom from religion, freedom from religion. It's something which is very problematic in Islamic societies. This is why there is not even one Islamic society which is real democracy. So this is the unfortunate situation in Iran. In my humble view, Iran will collapse, means will fragment to some 10, 12 emirates, means nation states, just like what happened in the Soviet Union, which was divided to 15 nation states, like Uzbekistan for the Uzbeks, Kazakhstan for the Kazakhs, Armenia for the Armenians, and so forth. The same thing will happen in Iran. A state for the Baloch in the southeast, a state for the Kurds in the northwest, another state for the Azeris in the old space of Azerbaijan, which Iran took over. And the Persians will remain in Persia, which is the center of Iran today. And this is the only way how to bring this part of the world into some kind of stability. Just exactly what happened with the Soviet Union, which was shattered to 15 pieces of 15 countries.
But I mean, it's a little bit different, because if you look at what happened, I guess before the Shah came in, there was some kind of a democratically elected, if you want to call them that, Mossadegh, and the CIA had their own, the whole story. The CIA had their own agendas. That set off a whole, a whole chain of events. So it's like they kind of can get their act together. It's not a total wash.
Look, Islamic societies can get their act together only under a dictatorship, as it is in every Islamic country. There is not even one real Islamic country which is a real democracy. People used to talk about Turkey as a democracy. Well, for years, Turkey is not a real democracy. By name it is, but not by nature. When the biggest number of journalists are in jail, not because of they committed something, just because they are journalists and they publish things which the Erdogan doesn't like, this is not a democracy. So it is, I would say, democracy limited, LTD. Okay, it's limited.
I have a question. I mean, 2 months ago, I managed to go to the Golan Heights with a friend of mine, and we had a meeting with Druze in, I think it was, I forget, Majd al-Sham. So we had a meeting with the council, I guess the city council members, and next to me sat a very nice gentleman, and I think in the 60s, a doctor, spoke very good English. And I was talking to him, and he was very, they seemed very, they had an Israeli flag over there, and they seemed very open to ideas. I have a friend who's actually trying to develop the Golan, to raise money to develop the Golan, now that we have, kind of recognition from Trump. And it's interesting. I went on YouTube after that, a couple of days after that, and I just wanted to research who this guy was, the doctor who I spoke to, and I saw a video of him, I think 20 or 25 years ago at a protest in Majel Shams holding up a Syrian flag, and they're interviewing him, perfect English, this is Associated Press, and they're asking him, what are you here to do today? He's like, well, it was at the time when Israel was trying to take, kind of full sovereignty over Golan. He said, no, we are, we want to be part of Syria, and we have family members in Syria, and some of us are here, and some of us are there. And so it's just funny how they talk that way to the AP, and then I'm sitting next to him, and he's talking the way that he was talking to me in a totally different way. So what are these people actually thinking? Meaning, what's the truth? Is it what they're telling me? Is it what they're telling AP? Is it something else? What do they want?
Well, let me tell you something. We, the Israelis, are the problem in this case. Because every time and again, we hear another Israeli politician who says more or less the same thing. Everybody knows what the price of peace between us and Syria is. This is the almost steady slogan of these people. And the price of peace with Syria will be the Golan. Mm-hmm. Now, every time which the Druze who live in the Golan hear this slogan again, they understand that in Israel, there are people who will support the giving of the Golan to Syria, even it will happen like after 70 or 80 or even 100 years from the Six-Day War when Israel took it from Syria. So they are afraid, the Druze in the Golan, that one day somebody will come and will punish them for the fact that they were with the Israelis to the degree that they took citizenship and took part in the Israeli elections. So this is why, in order to convince the Syrians not to send to them all kinds of hitmen or all kinds of these, or maybe later when Israel will give up on them, they don't want to run away from their homes. So they are very careful. And from this careful point of view, they keep saying that we will always look for the return of Israel to the Golan, or stay with the Golan. So because they are afraid that Syria will come back, and if the Syrians come back, the hell with them. If they did not oppose Israel, so they oppose Israel publicly because they know that Israel will not punish them, because we are not a country which punishes people who say that this country should exist. But Syria doesn't tolerate such things, and they are afraid from Syria much more than they are afraid from us. So this is what makes them say these things. Look, there are some minority of Syrian Druze who actually took Israeli citizenship. There are some of them, and there is a whole village of Alawis between us and Lebanon, who in the western slopes of the Hermon mountain, this village is named Rajar, and it's populated by Alawis only, and they have Israeli identity cards and everything. They are with the state totally, because they want to stay in Israel. They never want to go back to Lebanon.
These are the people that are Assad is an Alawite. They're part of his clan, so to speak, right?
What
Am I
is
correct? I said, just to clarify for people watching, Alawis are Assad. Assad is an Alawite.
Yes, he is an Alawite, and they are not Muslims.
Yeah.
They are viewed as infidels.
Yeah.
And all the rest is history.
So now that we're finally north, I want to ask you one last thing. Where do you see, is Hezbollah going to die out, or are they going to keep? Because you mentioned, we just keep all the convoys that are going from Iran. It's like rinse repeat. Putin sells stuff to Iran. Iran sends it through Syria, through Lebanon, and then we just bomb it. I remember I was in Shabbat at my family friends in January. I'm sitting it's in Kfar Tavor, and this is Motzei Shabbat, and 11:30 at night I hear like a jet flying into some direction, and then 30 minutes later, I read on the news, we just bombed some convoy in Syria. So are we just going to keep doing this, rinse repeat game with them, or is Hezbollah just going to eventually disappear as a result of this?
Well, let me tell you, Greg, I'm not part of the government. I don't have a secret channel with Bennett, the Minister of Defense.
You guys are neighbors.
Yes, yet it doesn't leak anything. Nice. And I know nothing more than average journalist who writes in the papers. And the only difference is the timeline, because he knows it before he writes. I know it after I read it. So this is actually, I have no idea what Israel's plans are. I have no idea what intelligence they have, means what information they have, because in order to attack something, you need to know where it is and what it is, and whether you like to endanger a pilot or a plane or what, in order to get rid of that thing which they have somewhere.
So do you think that Hezbollah is going to survive this? Because I just feel like watching, what is his name, Nasrallah, it just seems like he's just in this bunker and he's hiding, and they don't really have any, their power is just dwindling. So do people who live in the north of Israel have anything to, should they have anything to fear, in their homes? Just that one day, God forbid, a Katyusha rocket will, God forbid, hit their house?
Well, first of all, Israel is not such a big country. So if people in the north feel unsafe, it will not stay in the north. Because, first of all, don't forget that Hezbollah's stockpile of missiles, some of them can reach every point in Israel. So it's not only the north.
Yeah.
Secondly, their ability, let's say, to paralyze some of the oil production here in Israel definitely will put the whole country into a problem, because this is a one grid. So the problem is not restricted to the north, and the government knows it. And I hope they are prepared to do whatever needed in order to protect Israel from the paws of Nasrallah.
So I know I said actually, this is the last question I have for you. I guess last week, Pompeo announced, and even David Friedman reiterated, I think it was today or yesterday, that if Israel goes ahead and decides to annex Judea and Samaria, it's really up to them. It's as Esav said to Yaakov, what's yours is yours, as it were. So do you think that we're going to do it? And should we do it now?
But don't forget, as what we started with the Israeli Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Because if somebody appeals to the Supreme Court against the annexation, the court might feel that it has the authority to discuss it and to produce its ruling about this with a negative way. Means there is a possibility that the Supreme Court actually will stop the annexation, even if the government and the Knesset decide. So it is as you can never do anything in this country anymore unless you know either that the Supreme Court will not intervene in the whole thing, or will be in favor of it.
It's incredible.
Incredible. And I am a citizen. I feel that my country was hijacked. There is not real democracy. I can vote one man, and they will decide that this man is ineligible to form a government only because they think so.
Is there anything like regular citizens, like, for example, we have protests against the prime minister, we don't like something the prime minister is doing. Is there anything like a regular citizen can do? Let's say, God forbid, the Supreme Court says, okay, you guys can't annex. Is there anything like, I don't know, the Yudav Shomron movements can go out and protest against these people, or, even like regular, what we call Masorti people who are in favor of this, go in front of the Supreme Court and just say, listen, your power is just out of control. Like, what are you guys doing?
We do have some ways what to do. First of all, you can go on demonstrations. Yes, demonstrations are covered by the media, and they are in most cases. And the Supreme Court is not totally detached from the people in the street, and they can sometimes feel what the man in the street feels or wants. So demonstrations are definitely an option which nobody can cancel. Second thing is you can go to the media. You can write about this, you can complain about this. It could be in the papers, could be in the radio, could be in the TV, could be in the internet. Third thing, which people do, they actually appeal to the Supreme Court against all kinds of things which they see as inappropriate. And if they see that the Supreme Court is against the annexation, I can go to the Supreme Court and complain against the Supreme Court. How come you are against something? There is a way how to do it. Even against decisions or rulings of the Supreme Court. So there are some ways by which the Israeli population can still have an influence. Yet, don't forget that the one who really makes decisions in this country today is a lady named Esther Hayut, who is today the president of the judicial system. However, we do hope that a day will come and everybody will understand the coup which happened in this country, and the Supreme Court will return to be a court rather than the supreme government above the government and the supreme Knesset above the Knesset.
Mizrat Hashem. Well, Dr. Kedar, to say that this has been amazing, it would be an understatement. You have your function that you have to go to. I don't want to keep you too long. I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. We should do this again sometime when this thing, coronavirus, is over, maybe in person.
I'm yours whenever you like it.
Amazing, amazing. This has been fantastic, and I hope the viewers enjoyed this as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and Shabbat Shalom. And we will talk.
Keep safe. Keep safe. See you.
See you soon. We'll talk soon.